Forum Borealis. Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north and welcome to a brand new forum today called From Ancient to Breakaway Civilizations. Our guest today is the investigator Walter Bosley, who's out with a new book on a fascinating explorer's secret mission to the ruins of an antediluvian civilization looking for a specific artifact. Mr. Bosley is a genuine researcher in that he follows the track wherever the evidence leads him rather than seeking to confirm a biased agenda. This is probably in part thanks to his training and background as an FBI counterintelligence specialist during the Cold War and special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He has also been a personal security and anti-terrorism consultant for clients around the world. In addition, he has founded the Lost Continent Library Publishing Company. Apart from being a researcher into historical and occult mysteries, he is also an author of steampunk fiction, screenwriter, producer, and a licensed private investigator. Check our website for his biography and full bibliography and filmography. Walt now returns to the forum for a conversation on his research into the new book, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, which is the second part of his trilogy Secret Missions, which concerns both the ancient and the breakaway civilizations. Welcome back to Forum Borealis, Walter.
It's good to be here. I appreciate coming on.
Yeah, now you're officially a friend of the show.
Excellent.
Which is what we call returners. We've had Joseph on a couple of times. We're going to have a few others on too. But we had to have you on too because, just as the others, you're rather well versed in different subjects and incidentally subjects that we aim to cover here at the forum. And last time we were discussing this mysterious NIMSA group, and already then you were teasing us with what would come with your next book, which now is out. And the program today is going to be a part of the Antediluvian Civilization series we're having. So I checked your book, and it's called not Emperor of the Wheel, but Secret Mission 2, which is the other series, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. And I must say, Walter, you really know how to choose them, because this guy is so interesting. And I actually have a book of him. I haven't taken much notice of him before. I've seen him referenced here and there, but I actually have a Kama Sutra book of him, I think. And this guy, people, Sir Richard Francis Burton, we'll hear about him now from Walter, but it's really an interesting character. You really know how to pick them. So why on earth did you write about him?
I've long been an admirer of Burton, as a fan of real-life adventure as well as, pulp adventure and stuff, but particularly a history buff and a real-life adventure fan. He's just a guy who, you can't ignore. He's so out there. He's a legendary explorer for the Royal Geographical Society, just as legendary as an ethnographer, if that's the right word, and an anthropologist, and of course as an author and translator. You mentioned the Kama Sutra. He provided the first English translation of the Kama Sutra, as well as, I believe, if not the first of the Arabian Nights, certainly the most popular English translation and most lasting of those English translations of the Arabian Nights. And he himself has always been just such a fascinating, interesting character But yet I did not know every little detail about him still. And when I stumbled upon, just in some free reading I was doing, I stumbled upon this issue of the missing months in his life, and that he was in South America in the wilderness down there in the jungle. That just immediately caught my imagination, and I wondered, what is this? I mean, a guy like him, I've got to look closer at this. And that's really how that happened. Just a guy who had always interested me. I learned something new about him, and the more I dug, the more I found.
Well, we ought to add that this is not Hollywood celebrity Richard Burton.
Right, that's a Sir Richard Francis, the original Richard Burton.
Yeah, he probably got a lot of traction due to his name.
Sure.
Because this guy was a celebrity in a few generations before, and he's so fascinating. For instance, not only did he travel all over the world, so I would be amazed if he wasn't in South America, but he spoke 40 languages.
Yes. Yeah, and he was a linguist when he began his career in the military. He went into, I should say, for the East India Company. It was one of the company military units. He became a linguist for them, and when they brought him into intelligence work, they trained him as a surveyor to be part of his cover. He was a legitimate surveyor of engineering, but he was trained in that to use as a cover for intelligence activities for the East, as an officer for the East India Company. And one of his very special skills was languages. He was amazing.
According to Wiki, these are the adjectives that are attached to him: a British explorer, geographer, translator, writer, soldier, orientalist, cartographer, ethnologist, spy, you covered that, linguist, we mentioned that too, poet, fencer, and diplomat. So I have a few before I can fill his shoes.
They left a big one out.
Yeah? Which
one? He
was
was a Kabbalist.
Right.
Very mystic-minded, but he was very much, from the time he was a young man, he got into the Kabbalah. And my book goes into that. And that's really kind of what is involved with my theory about this, so what I call Lost Expedition.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But was Burton a Mason too?
He eventually, you asked me off the top of my head. I didn't get too into that. I believe that he was at one point, and I'd like to be able to name the lodge, but off the top of my head, I can't remember what it was, and I'm not going to waste time scouring through the book here. But
no.
He was definitely mentored and influenced by Masons as well, so he was in that milieu.
Yeah, I would expect, because back at that time period, people were either Masons or Theosophists. There wasn't too many. Like today, there's so many mystery schools and orders and whatnot that many of them only exist on the internet, but they throw it after you. Back then, it was hard to get in touch with people, and many were so conventional. It was Catholicism or Protestantism or whatnot. So Freemasonry and Theosophy, for those who don't know it, were like huge think tank of innovative and original minded. Attracted often the best and the brightest. And I must say also, you seem to have a fetish on the 19th century, because here again,
I do.
I mean, in your fiction and your facts, I'm pretty sure that in your former life, maybe you lived in New Orleans somewhere 50 years ago or something.
Well, I am. The way I refer to it is I am a reincarnationist. I personally have been convinced that we do return. And I have had for many years, really all my life, a certain affinity for the 19th century, especially the second half of it. So yes, I am. I'm drawn to that era. I'm drawn to the people of that era. My next Secret Missions book that looks like it's going to happen. I don't do these things just to write a book. I have to find enough evidence for me to justify a book. And the next one looks like it's moving down that road where I'm finding things where it looks like it needs to happen. And it's about another 19th century figure in all this mix. So, yeah, there's something there. Definitely something there for me in that regard, on that personal level. So.
Okay, so let's turn to this book then, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. That title, as always, you're good with your titles.
Thank you.
Very, very alluring. So I can assume we're talking about an expedition, one of his expeditions here then, that you looked into.
What we're talking about actually is a missing period in which we know that he was wandering around South America, but we know nothing about it, really. What's crucial about that point is that Burton's prolific in his reporting of his travels and everything he did, his Africa era, his India era. I mean, everything this man did, even while he was in South America for a little over 3 years. Okay. And during that time, he wrote a couple of books. He wrote lots of reports. He wrote articles, but his last 6 months in South America are surprisingly blank. We know a little bit about the first 2 months of that he spent in Buenos Aires, but it's very specifically a 4-month period where there's nothing. And all that's been proposed on that is really conjecture based on some comments that he made that I think were really just kind of a sleight of hand to misdirect people from what he was really doing. And so what I propose in this book is that he indeed was on a secret expedition, which for reasons that the book goes into and we'll discuss a little bit here, was classified. And therefore the lost expedition, because he never wrote about it publicly. I am convinced that somewhere in British archives, particularly with the intelligence agencies, that there is a report of this period he was in South America and on what he really saw. And I try to speculate on what that would have been based on known facts and actual historical details of his time in South America leading up to that.
It's really too bad that his wife burnt his diaries and notebooks.
If she did, there's some question. That was a common practice back then, but even the biographers wonder, how much of it she actually destroyed and who might have. Yeah. What survived.
Because I was imagining that an important source was lost. But obviously you must have managed to track up some traces. So first of all, what do you suspect that he was after? I mean, you already alluded to previous concepts about South America. So there's something here you are already aware of that you are connecting to
right.
Burton. So
yes.
What's that?
Well, it has long been very what am I trying to say here? A popular theme with South America that there is or was a civilization now lost. We have ruins like those at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku on Lake Titicaca. We have, of course, the historical sites, Machu Picchu and all of this that are, virtually very popular tourist sites now. And they're very popular targets of speculation due to the technology, the architectural technology that went into building some of these megalithic structures at these sites. And of course, if you read Prescott's The History of the Conquest of Peru, he cites during the Spanish conquest, he cites Pizarro's and other Spanish reports that the local natives and the Inca it's important to make a distinction, between the two. Not everyone who was a native was technically an Inca. They always said, 400 or 500 years ago, that the culture that built the megalithic structures was much older than them, was a mystery to them. And, this has fascinated people for, several years now. And what it points to is a concept that, many other writers and researchers have been talking about for several years now, and that's the idea of a lost civilization that used to be referred to simply as Atlantis, but now gets referred to as something called the Atlantean League, which really represents a civilization that, for lack of a better term, we'll call it Atlantis, because Plato certainly, did. And they went around the world building colonies, building cities and such, and they're the ones responsible for this megalithic architecture that we see, according to the theory of the Atlantean League and diffusionism. Right. I happen to be a proponent of diffusionism and of this idea of the Atlantean League. In fact, I'm a proponent of more than one lost civilization, the Atlantean one being one of them. The other one being what we call Lemuria actually was, which was Pacific or Far East Asia based. And then, of course, there was the Rama Empire, which is discussed in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the ancient scriptures of ancient lost India, so to speak. And you had these civilizations, and South America seems to have been a heart center of this activity. And what I think was going on is that Burton, when you know his history, was the guy, at least on behalf of England, to go into South America and investigate this general idea, investigate some of these sites, but very specifically a site associated with a manuscript in the Portuguese archives in Brazil called Manuscript 512, which seems to be at the heart of what Burton was doing in South America to begin with.
Wow, yeah. In part 2, I think we should go more deeper into the question of these old civilizations. But already now I want to ask you if you're aware of the writings of, I think he was a professor, an Argentinian professor called Augustus Le Plongeon or something like that.
August Le Plongeon?
Yeah. That's the English pronunciation, I guess.
I haven't. Yeah, you know what? I'm familiar with his name, and I just haven't looked at Le Plongeon's stuff in a while. I probably need to refresh my exposure to Le Plongeon.
Yeah, because he is. I've been personally interested in the question of ancient civilizations for a long, long time. But I'm a European, and I guess the incentive to know the American version of this is not so strong. It's not so have not been so accessible to us. So I got his book called Maya Atlantis just to learn more about South American approach, and he really proves. And remember, this was a mainstream academic. He wrote.
Yes.
Yeah, he wrote back in the day, I think he lived at the end of the 19th century, but he proves that there are so many similarities in words, linguistic, and in symbols, and in even in building stuff, that you just can't, because many people regard the word Atlantis as more or less poetic to describe the former civilization, but if you dig into it, it seems to be built on a real word that they had for their civilization.
Sure. Yes.
So it is a fair name for the former civilization before the Ice Age.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been interested in the South American remnants of either Atlantis or the survivor of Atlantis then?
Yes.
Even before you dug into Burton.
Yes, and I learned even more while doing the Burton book about the other civilizations, of course, that ventured over to South America, and that's where I had mentioned this manuscript 512, which was at the heart of what Burton was doing. It is also a good intro into this lost civilization conversation about South America in general. My first opportunity to go visit there was actually when I was a consultant, a counterterrorism consultant. I had worked in Bogota, Colombia for about a month when I had an opportunity that was in early 2003, and in February 2003 I had the opportunity to go with David Hatcher Childress and his World Explorers Club group into Peru and Bolivia, and that was when I saw Pumapunku and Tiwanaku and Machu Picchu and all that. And I really, I was already interested. I was already a proponent. But when I saw Pumapunku, it was, for me, that, I was convinced that there was machining that had gone on. There was an advanced technology. There was something more there than meets the eye. And it was really an exciting sight to see, and then I spent a couple of more months in Colombia after that trip, but more on the job. And really, what little I've seen of South America I love, and I can't wait to go back, both as a tourist traveler and as a researcher. But because I think the heart of the mystery of these lost civilizations, there's plenty in North America that I think that there's a lot that has been found and, quite frankly, suppressed, particularly by the Smithsonian.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, but I there's maybe even a lot more in South America. I think that's where, at least in South America, it's not as suppressed. You can go and see these things. In North America, they like to just push the consensus history model, and God forbid you think of or advocate anything else. That's the way it is particularly in U.S. academia.
Yeah. We had Michael Cremo on this show, and he's, as you know, been writing and talking about these things.
Yes.
And how it's this knowledge filter, this bias filter that makes them think they're doing us a favor when they're stewing away these things in basements, dark storerooms and whatnot.
Right, exactly.
But and in South America, of course, is where also these weird alien-like skulls have appeared. I'm thinking about these elongated skulls.
Right.
And you mentioned Childress, and he's been pretty exposed in the ancient aliens, ancient astronauts circles. I don't know if that's his position though, but he's been one of that crowd on the television programs. But I have to say that here on this show, in this series we are making, although we are not dismissing the possibility of alien contact, alien involvement, alien visits, we're of the firm conviction, due to evidence, mind you, not due to ideology, but due to evidence, that mankind's history is far older than what we're led to believe.
Oh, yes.
So invoking monsters from Mars isn't necessary in order to explain these things. And if we are to believe our ancestors, it is us. Right. We are the ancient.
Here's the thing. The extraterrestrials that aren't us are certainly in the mix. The farther you go back, they're in the mix. Knowing David to the extent that I'm acquainted with him, and knowing his writings and his ideas, David he leans towards a little bit more what you and I were just talking about, where a lot of this mystery really is a lost human civilization. But he's also, as I said, I think the way he sees it is that ET is in the mix, but it's by no means the answer to most of this stuff. I'm of that mind too, where it's a lot of human history. A lot of the answers are to be found in the unknown or hidden human history, and I think that maybe a fair number of us probably started somewhere else. And as you said, we are the ETs, so to speak.
Yeah, that complicates it even more, because we may have been if you really go back, we may have entered this planet from another place. But then again, we may have sent out people to other.
Well, I think my position is that some of us came from another world. Some of us are probably indigenous to this planet. All human, all the same.
Yeah.
We're all the same species. But it's like this. We have this planet. We have all these multiple continents. Some people live in Europe. Some people live in India. Some people live in North America. Some people, live in Southeast Asia or Australia. But we're all of the same species, right? Yeah. We just come from these different continents. We'll take it out, macro it. Some of us maybe were on Mars and a long time ago came here and brought, some of this technology with us. So it's really, as Ray Bradbury wrote in the Martian Chronicles, it's us. We are the Martians. But I think that indeed was a long time ago, and since that happened, humanity has civilizations, advanced technological civilizations of humans have come and gone, and are likely the answer to most of these mysteries that we're talking about.
Okay, you see, this is so interesting that we can't help it. We're already philosophizing about that. Let's get back to your book, and we'll continue this thread after. I'll try to be a little host here. Do my duty. Manuscript 502. 99.9% of us have no idea what that is. Could we start with that?
Yes, manuscript 512.
512.
It's a delicious.
Right, yeah.
Yes, 512. It is a delicious little tidbit in all of this. Basically, here's the story. In my book, Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton, I go ahead and reprint the entire English translation of this document. It's in the book. And basically, here's what happened. Brazil, as you know, was Portuguese. And in 1753, 1753, an expedition that was an ongoing concern, led by a Portuguese, I believe he was a military officer, was out exploring for, mines and resources, things like that. And his party came upon this astounding lost city that had been abandoned ages before. And this lost city had buildings and a huge arched entrance and a very strange language, strange even to this day. And it looked like that there had been some destruction caused either by lightning or maybe energy generated by some technology possibly. And upon return to Rio de Janeiro, to civilization, the leader of this expedition wrote his report in full detail as to what they found and what they encountered. And this was designated Manuscript 512, or Manuscripto 512. And it was promptly filed away, buried in Portuguese archives. Okay? And it sat there virtually unknown to the world for about, I believe, 86 years, I think is the math on that. And in 1839, a government clerk type came across this and, brought a little bit of local light on it. And, somehow word got out of Brazil to the English-speaking world. And after a few decades, remember it was 1839 that this document reemerged, and it wasn't until 1865 that it was translated into English for the first time that we know of. And that translation was done in July of 1865. And 3 weeks later, Sir Richard Francis Burton was on a boat with a copy of that translation in his hand on a boat to Brazil. Now, here's what's interesting. The first English translation is credited to Isabel Burton, Richard Burton's wife, who often did, work with him and did translations for him. So he goes off to Brazil with the first English translation of this manuscript 512 that talks about this lost city in Brazil. And the translation's done by his wife. And, he spends, like I said, a little over 3 years in South America. And before the expedition we talked about earlier, he goes around investigating the area that manuscript 512 talks about. And he even writes a book titled Explorations in the Highlands of Brazil.
Okay.
And what's interesting is in the book, he never mentions manuscript 512. He doesn't say anything about the lost city, but he's all over every inch of the zone where this city supposedly is located. However, in the appendix of the book, he publishes the English translation of manuscript 512 without mentioning it in the text of the book and without mentioning anything about a lost city. But yet he puts manuscript 512 in the appendix of this book, and which is another whole issue that I go into in my book, that I say points to. In fact, there's a chapter I call the smoking gun. I think this is the smoking gun as to what the real reason why Burton went to South America. But to bring it back to the lost city thing, some very interesting things about this lost city, its description, its location, associate to the lore of South America and lost cities.
I know that there was a fever to find El Dorado. Is this connected to that?
It is in a general way, yes. The idea that this idea of El Dorado and the stories that were going around in South America, that there were lost cities in the jungle
with gold
down there,
and all.
Yeah, certainly, and I cover that in the book as to a particular issue about the gold and maybe its source. But yeah, in the general sense, this was all in the fabric of what was going on there. But this manuscript 512 seems to be among the best evidence, as well as, you got to remember, at the time that manuscript 512 was filed, 1753, at the time that it reemerged in 1839, at the time that it was translated into English, some of these sites were unknown to the public, like Machu Picchu and Pumapunku and such. These things were not, when Burton was there, and I argue when he went to Lake Titicaca and saw Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, these were little known and aspects of it were completely unknown. It's not like today where there were tourists, filing down there and going down there, and it, certainly wasn't on TV. These things were still, mostly supposedly unknown. So,
but you think that he actually found these places? Where are these places?
I do speculate in the book, and I make it clear in my book that we can only speculate what the details of this expedition were. But yeah, I am convinced that he was sent there specifically to find the city of manuscript 512, also known as the city of 1753, because that's when Portuguese explorers found it. It's key to remember that it is an ancient city of a lost civilization. And I'm convinced that he was sent there to find it, and that he indeed did find it and reported on it. And it remains classified.
But Pumapunku is not this city, is it?
No.
But still in Bolivia. That's the general area we're talking about.
He started this lost expedition. He started in Brazil and then went west into Bolivia, and then on into Peru. Because
Peru,
he emerged, we know for a fact that he emerged after this missing time. He emerged in Lima, Peru.
What's the mainstream oldest dating in the mainstream of Machu Picchu and Pumapunku and these places?
Just like a few hundred years, maybe no more than
really
1,000, something like that. Oh yeah. It was all done by the Inca and the local natives.
Yeah. And they dragged huge stones from
with viney ropes,
whips and ropes, and over half the continent. Yeah, typical. But one good thing I think about the Ancient Aliens series, the TV series, is that, and I keep telling people who hasn't seen it, I always say to them, watch this series, especially the first seasons, and take notice of the mysteries they focus upon. Like, for instance, explaining how could these strange, let's say these engineer feats, which we can't even replicate today,
right?
How can they? Because the mysteries in themselves are genuine. The problem is their explanations is always. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. I always say to people, as an advice, if they haven't seen it, disregard the explanation, but take a close notice of the mysteries because they are genuine.
Yeah. That's. I don't always agree with the conclusions. I met Giorgio, the main guy on there, about 11 years ago through David. Really nice guy. He's a smart guy, and I don't always agree with their conclusions. How often they'll come to the Ancient Aliens conclusion? But you're absolutely right. I was on the show since we talked last.
Oh.
I was on the show on the Werner von Braun episode that aired July 31st. So if your listeners search for Ancient Aliens, the Nazi Secret Agenda episode, I'm in there towards the end, I think in the last 20 minutes or something.
Cool, I'll check that out.
It's an interesting episode. It was fun. We didn't really get into the ancient stuff, but it was fun. It was fun to be on the show.
Was it the NIMSA approach that brought you there?
That's what got them interested, but I didn't really. I talked about that. They in the interview they had me there for about 2 hours, and we did cover some of that, but that's not in the Von Braun episode. And the way they do it is they just film you talking about a bunch of stuff, and then as they go through,
they edit it.
They'll put it in different episodes. So if they're going to let me know if I'm going to turn up in any other episodes, of course. But anyway, I personally am in the camp of human history is not what we're led to believe, and that human civilization is responsible for a lot more of these mysteries than aliens.
So obviously there's been a previous civilization that's now lost who built, because it's the same thing in South America as actually all over the globe. It's that the further back we go in history, the more advanced things seems. It's not this linear development that we're trained to believe, but it's rather a decay going on. I'd say the bottom point, at least in the West, is the medieval ages. Everything declines and declines and declines, and from the medieval ages it starts going up again.
Yes, thank God.
Yeah.
for the Renaissance.
At least it seems that way, but sometimes I wonder even today. But if you look at South America, then what's the general theory? What is your thoughts about? I'm guessing you're thinking it's a remnant from Atlantis, but
that's part of it.
Yeah, let's hear.
Well, as I said before, I'm a diffusionist. I am convinced that many cultures around the world were going all over the world. They were seafaring, and I think there has been evidence of Roman exploration, at least along the coastal lands of South America. I think the ancient Romans. I certainly think the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Chinese, Phoenicians, absolutely. South Pacific Islanders. I think several African explorers. I think any culture that was seafaring was going all over the place and certainly was part of the mix in South America. And there is evidence for that, particularly, the farther you go north in Central America and into Mexico.
Yeah.
And you get into North America with the evidence there too. But speaking of South America.
And the Vikings.
Exactly.
I just have to give a shout out for the Vikings.
Yeah.
That's proven.
But you gotta remember that there's only, if you go to the easternmost point, I believe, of Brazil, it's only about 600 or 700 miles west of Africa, the western point of Africa. See, that's not really that far. If I got the mileage, I might have the number wrong there, because in the book I go into the probability that Vasco da Gama actually did just whip over those few hundred miles. I mean, he came within just a few hundred miles of that might be where I'm getting that number. He came within just a few hundred miles of the coast of South America, and I argue that, that close and on an expedition that lasts years, you're gonna go. Particularly when now remember, we're talking about theoretically here. I'm coming from the point of view that these guys, these explorers, had what was classified information then about the New World, because that gets into the Templars and what they found.
You cover this in the book?
I go into that in this book. I go into it in Secret Missions 1. Yeah, absolutely. How the Templars, because
the Kensington runestone is now proven genuine.
Yes.
There's no way around it.
Yeah, and so these guys knew, by the time you get to the Portuguese explorers and the Spanish conquest and all that, these guys knew what they were. Columbus knew what he was going to find. And
sorry, let me just inject regarding Columbus that there was this the Jarl of Orkney. He was these was Viking kings, and they inherited maps from the earlier Vikings, the seafarers who went to the west, Greenland, where they had colonies, Newfoundland, and these maps went from the Jarl of Orkney to Sinclair and to Columbus, because I think it was a sibling of Columbus was married to someone who was, I think, a very close relative of the Jarl of Orkney. I forgot these details.
Well,
but there was a line there.
And he was also Templar associated too. Yeah. I mean, if you recall, the sails on his flagship had a big old Templar cross, which is what we call a foot stomper.
But these were Templars. You see, Sinclair was, as you probably know, he was the Scottish protector.
Yes, I go into that very deeply in Secret Missions 1.
Oh, really?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I get into Henry Sinclair's expedition to North America. And
wow, I think I need all your books. You cannot deduct that from the title, though, of the book.
Oh, well, there's just so much that you can only do. I guess I know one reviewer, because Secret Missions 1, the subtitle is The Hidden Legacy of Old California. I had one guy tell people, hey, don't be misled. The book isn't just about California and isn't just for people familiar with California history. Secret Missions 1 actually, goes into European Templar history and all over North America, what the Templars were doing.
So your Secret Mission series then is, in a way, now I understand why you call it Secret Missions. I imagined agents or something, but it's obviously about these explorers and this past history then, this hidden history of ancient times. That's what this series is touching upon as a subject, as a theme.
Yeah, well, actually, and these guys are. I argue that they were secret agents
of the time,
the organization. Juan Cabrillo was a secret agent working on behalf of the Templars. Sir Richard Francis Burton, I argue, was a secret agent working on behalf of a covert Hermetic organization, as well as being a British intelligence officer.
Yeah, because that's what I thought, a British intelligence, but this is interesting.
Yeah, no, this is at the heart of this are the Templars and secret Hermetic organization that these guys were working on behalf of. And the next guy who I'm writing about, it looks like it's going to happen. There's evidence that he was an intelligence officer for his country, but he was also very much involved in this hermetic, esoteric stuff. So
that wouldn't be Crowley, would it?
No. Who I'm actually kind of an admirer of. I think.
Yeah, I know you covered him in one of your other books.
Yeah, yeah. But no, it's not. It's not Crowley. It's another interesting guy.
Okay.
I think that these guys were all, and again, you're right. That's why the series is Secret Missions, because it's looking at people that I'm saying, hey, look what this guy did, and look what he might have really been doing, and for whom. Technically, you could say that Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, that we talked about last time, technically, in a way, that's kind of unofficially the first Secret Missions book because of what it gets into about Etta Place and Harry Longabaugh. That was kind of an unofficial start of the Secret Missions idea, and it looks like there's going to be, a third one of these that, in a year and a half. So,
right. So, but then you have the other series, Empire of the Wheel, and I'm already suspecting that it points to something very old, and I don't know if you want to go into that. Is that relevant to this book?
What do you mean specifically?
The concept of Empire of the Wheel and this goddess and all that.
Yes, that's you mean Hecate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the funny little thing about all my books, these nonfiction books, is that she's there and she turns up. I'll tell you. She turns up when I'm not looking for her. When I started these Secret Missions books, I thought, okay, I'm done with the Empire of the Wheel trilogy. I'm on to something else, and it turns out that
the lady wouldn't have that.
Secret Missions 1 covers a major Hecate association, and then I thought, well, Secret Missions 2, this Burton book, there can't be anything in there, right? Oh, was I wrong? There happens to be. It's a little bit smaller than in Secret Missions 1, but again, she's there. And it's very interesting how this Hecate thread really, I mean, she's even there in my first nonfiction book I did back in 2007 called Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom.
Oh, the Disney book.
The Disney book, the Disneyland book, and it's just she's there. And gosh, what do you say about that? That the books say a lot about it as far as the details, but in a general sense, you're right. She's always reminding me. Here I am, and
yeah, because it was an ancient empire, and
right.
we are looking at traces of ancient empires here.
Right. Well, and the Phoenicians were associated with Hecate worship, and Hecate is a goddess who was considered very, very old to the ancient, original old Egyptians. Now think about that. She's considered what's called one of the chthonic, which is where Lovecraft, of course, draws his, Cthulhu etymological theme. The chthonic gods are the old elders. And, so her roots go way, way back. So you're right. It's not surprising that when we're talking about and looking at these lost civilizations that we're going to find her there. Now, we say she and her, maybe she represents something like electricity, an energy, a force that, electricity, it does a lot of good. It powers our civilization, but then on the other hand, if you mishandle it, it can be deadly, right? So, but yes, she's there. Right. She's definitely there.
Yeah. Well, we live in an electric universe, so she's everywhere. Yeah. We're going to have programs on the theory of the electric universe, the Thunderbolt people. But back to your book here. I admit it's very peculiar, and as an investigator, as a detective, I can understand why it piqued your curiosity and focus. That Mr. Burton put this translation in at the end of the book, footnotes?
He he put the English translation of manuscript 512 as its own appendix in his in his 2-volume book Explorations in the Highlands of Brazil. Now, this was something that was done before the mysterious lost period.
Okay, but without explaining or validating.
Without explaining, exactly. He just kind of, and I went through the manuscript Explorations of the Highlands of Brazil, looking for reference to the manuscript, looking for reference to the lost city, and I didn't find it, and it's a very curious thing, in my opinion. It's as if he's giving you a foot stomper to those who read between the lines and are smart enough to see, and I don't think it takes a genius with him putting that in the manuscript, that's what he was saying. It's like, look, this is what I was looking for. And, maybe it was some type of surveyor's guide as to, if you really dug into that book of his, maybe there's clues there that, in the amount of time I allotted to looking through this, I was trying to get this particular book done to get the general theory out there. Maybe he does give clues as to where it was at. I also argue that were it not for what Richard Burton was looking for and doing in South America, were it not for this lost expedition that I speculate he went on, the whole Colonel Fawcett episode would never have happened. I think Fawcett was his search and his expeditions were a direct result of the Burton exploration.
Okay, for all the people who are not familiar with that, could you give a short, brief version of that?
Yes, Colonel Fawcett was an interesting guy in the late 19th, early 20th century, who disappeared. He's most famous for disappearing in 1925 in Brazil, in the jungles of Brazil, looking for a lost city. Now, there is a city, there's a movie coming out soon based on a book titled The Lost City of Z by an author, David Gran. And Z was the city that Fawcett was looking for. Now, in my book, I go into the significance of Fawcett calling his lost city Z, because it ties, in my opinion, directly to Burton's research leading up to his time in South America. And I go into that in the book. I go into what I think Z was, and it reveals that maybe, Fawcett's city, there's some information out there.
Z as in the letter Z? The
letter Z, yes.
Okay.
And anyway, not to get sidetracked off on Colonel Fawcett, because you can look him up. People can do a search, and they can look up this lost city of Z. Brad Pitt was going to be in the movie. Now he's not, but the movie is happening, and it should be really interesting. But this whole thing about this lost civilization was drawing, guys like Burton, guys like Fawcett, even the brother of Ian Fleming, the creator of the James Bond character and series of books. So here you had British intelligence types, drawn to this whole lost city motif in South America, and you have guys who are interested in esoteric sciences and ancient hermetic and alchemical history and mystery, drawn to South America, looking for these remnants of these lost civilizations. And you got to ask yourself why. What's going on?
I was going to ask you that actually, but now that you mention it, why? Why would they send? I mean, there's so many remnants of ancient civilization. What particularly piqued the curiosity of the British intelligence here?
Well,
obviously they're after something in particular.
The British intelligence interest is actually not that complicated.
Okay.
In the 19th century, and again, this is something that's in Empire of the Whale 2, Friends from Sonora, which we talked about. You had a lot of German nationalist activity. That was really the beginning of the German presence in South America, was the 19th century. I mean, that's when it really stepped up. And going into the 20th century, it becomes even more obvious why British intelligence intelligence would be interested in what are the Germans doing in South America. But not just South America. There was also sources of oil in Mexico in the, that turn of the century period, 19th into 20th. And, the British, they were getting their oil from there as much as the United States was. And, of course, this was the industrial era. And, it was a resources thing, a vital resources thing, and the upcoming enemy in the 20th century wars. So, it's natural. It makes perfect sense of British intelligence. Now, the reason that you get the Hermeticists is the ancient civilizations and the technology that they believed these ancient civilizations possessed, and they were always looking for the remnants of this technology to revive it.
No, but at this point, we are used to thinking that the German Hermeticists were, or occultists, they were not all Hermeticists, but that they had this more technological approach to things. But now you're saying that even the British...
the British and the United States. Not to get into that subject too deeply, but I have been putting together a picture of, which again, from... especially in Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora. It was when I first really dug into it and stumbled on some things. But I'll be speaking at the Secret Space Program conference in Texas this October, and I will be presenting my point of view of this lost civilization connection to the rise of the breakaway civilizations, and there's a United States hand and interest and involvement in all this, very much so. And so the British would have been interested in what we were doing, what the Germans were doing, especially. But it's the guys who were interested in the ancient lost stuff where things get really intriguing.
Let me validate that with a little tidbit that I know, and that is that the 20th century Hermeticists and esotericists and occultists have had a much more symbolism focus. But when you go back to the 19th century, that's when science, mechanics, engineering, electronics, all these types of technology is boosting. It's new, it's fresh.
Yes.
And back then, it was much more natural to associate, to remove this strict barrier between the physical, the technological, and the symbolic, the allegorical. But then came this wave of symbolism. Well, it's all symbolism, but this wave of interpreting is strictly psychological, interpreting everything strictly spiritual, disregarding the physical aspects.
Right.
So that's actually a newer, which means that they were more prone to take it literally and not discount the technological aspects of it back in the 19th century.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're onto something here.
And in the 20th century, the reason you see this move to, none of that's real, it's all symbolic, it's all that I am convinced was part of the suppression of the advances.
Yeah, especially after the war.
The 19th century guys made. Yeah. Advances before the war. I argue that there would have been no exotic Nazi technology had it not been for this mysterious 19th century organization called NIMSA.
Yeah, but the symbolic, the allegoric interpretation is better to say, because everything is symbolic, even the physical information it was hidden in symbols. But this allegorical spiritual interpretation got a huge boost after the war. And that dovetails with the suppression of the science before the war, the Tesla science, the vibration science. So there may be a deliberate conspiracy there, actually.
Oh, sure, but to me, it's important to make the distinction that all of this stuff that we talk about now as regards the secret space program and the breakaway civilizations, again, not to get too deep into that, a lot of people are under the impression that it didn't get started in earnest until after World War II, and that is a huge mistake. Sure. This stuff got started in earnest before 1900.
Oh, yeah.
This stuff was starting in the 1850s, okay? And that's why I'm saying the NIMSA and these mysterious groups, when the Nazi scientists, the German scientists that then eventually started doing this stuff for the Nazis, were doing this stuff as early as the 1920s. They were being directly influenced and guided by these mysterious groups that had been operating for 60 or 70 years, and there is a tendency for people to think that all of this that we're talking about didn't really get started till after World War II. And I try to present the evidence and argue that no, it really. It started long before then.
Yeah.
50 years before then or more. 100 years.
Oh, yeah, there's so much indications and evidence for that. Now, what I was saying is that after the war, there was a boom of this allegorical interpretation, the psychological. And in fact, there seems to be like the technology goes black.
Yep.
And there's a much more clearer distinction between materialism. If you believe in technology and science, you do not believe in these spiritual things, and the opposite.
Right. There's a huge division.
Yeah, a division. That's the word.
That has an interesting origin. I'm glad you brought that up. This division that arose. That has a direct connection to my Burton book. When you go back to the history of the Royal Society.
Right. Invisible College.
The Royal Geographical Society, the Royal Astronomical, the Royal Society, these scientists.
Yeah.
There was a particular year that was a pivotal year, and that was 1830. Up until 1830, what they called philosopher scientists, the science-minded guys who didn't put a division between the allegorical, who were just as equally, Isaac Newton was every bit as much the alchemist as he was an astronomer, okay?
An astrologer.
Yeah, exactly. And up until 1830, these philosopher balanced scientists, I call them, okay, full spectrum scientists and thinkers. These guys outnumbered the technician scientists in the Royal Society until 1830. Now, what happened in 1830, and I go into this in the Burton book, what happened in 1830 was that you had a monarch who wanted, who had, prior to that, had wanted to suppress the whole Stuart claim to the throne before then, and had gotten in there and had manipulated records and such, and had manipulated the culture of the Royal Society, so that by 1830, what happened was the technician scientists finally outnumbered the philosopher scientists who founded the Royal Societies, by the way.
Occultists, all of them.
The technician scientists who disdained the philosopher scientists, they outnumbered the philosopher scientists and finally took control of the Royal Society. And therefore, after 1830, to be an officer of the Royal Society, a member of it, you had to be a pure professional technical scientist.
Yeah, a materialist, right?
Yeah, a materialist. And I argue that was a huge detriment. And that was the beginning of today's worship of materialist scientists really began with what happened to the Royal Society in 1830. Now, I also argue that the people behind Burton as a secret agent for a Hermetic organization, they were the philosopher scientists of the Royal Society who had to kind of go underground with these suits, because the limited materialist scientists would have wanted no part of it. And so that right there is the origin of what you're talking about, particularly in the post-World War II era, of, a real scientist doesn't think about this other stuff, right? And those who think about this other stuff can't really claim to be a real scientist. That's where its roots are. It goes back,
It's so interesting. I didn't know that. I knew that during the 19th century, this division, but 1830, you can actually pinpoint it.
Yes.
And it of course had political reasons, as always.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, that's why, and that was really the beginning of this whole I call it the damn priesthood whatever of science.
Yeah, let me just interject. It's called scientism. This
Yes.
fundamentalistic, faith-based.
Well, and the whole academic thing, at least in the States, where careers are considered before truth. These guys, they've got houses, they've got mortgages, they've got families, kids to put through college, and they've got reputations, and they got their books to sell. And, if you go looking for truth, you're going to upset what their theories are, and then they might lose that.
Yeah, this is why we're so important with people like Rupert Sheldrake. We're going to have a series actually on the science delusion, the delusion that the ideology of materialism equals truth. Therefore, you do not have to apply the scientific principle on that ideology, which of course is a short circuit. But we're losing ourselves in something other interesting distraction. But,
yes, we are.
But back to track, you actually answered my question that I had prepared next, which was, who was this Hermetic group? But you don't have to say any more than the Royal Society, because it gives itself. Because if we look at these people who was a member of what you call the philosopher scientists, which is a good word actually, because a philosopher is did not mean what it means today.
Right.
Today, philosophy or a philosopher is someone who's studying what people have thought through the history.
Right.
It's a kind of idea history. But back then, it was a lover of wisdom, as Pythagoras coined it. It was an alchemist, an initiate, an hermetist. And
well, to clarify, when we're talking about who it was, here's the thing: the Hermetic group that I argue that Burton was recruited by and working for, we really don't know we don't know this group's identity, their name. It certainly included the philosopher scientists of the Royal Society, but it doesn't end there. What it is
I know.
These Hermeticists were part of this secret covert organization, brotherhood, whatever you want to call it. I hate to use the word brotherhood because that gets into some other theories I disagree with. Okay. But this secret group, they had their members in the Royal Society. They had their members in Freemasonry. They had their members in British intelligence. They remain a mystery.
And they go back, well, not so much actually, because well, they do, but today we know
not their personal identities. You can identify them as from man to man.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the organization itself.
Yeah.
Looks like it at this point. I couldn't put a name on the organization.
Yeah. Well, I think that this actually is a funny synchronicity, because we just had a Norwegian on who's cracked some huge codes, and I know this sounds very old and tiresome, but believe me, it is innovative. It's in Shakespeare.
Oh, excellent.
And yes, you ought to check out these programs, because what he found is that this group you're talking about is probably the same group that goes back to Francis Bacon, and they invented the Invisible College, Elias Ashmole.
Yes, of course.
And which led to the Royal Society, and there was a clique, an inner circle, if you like, within Masonry, within Rosicrucianism. Actually, the real Rosicrucians, the original Rosicrucians, but of course, before that, they were not called Rosicrucians. And these people, we can identify many of them, and King James, of all people, were also involved. I'm just throwing it out here now, as a teaser for you.
I discussed some of these very people that you just named.
You do?
In the Burton book, yeah. Elias Ashmole.
Exactly.
And some of this stuff. You're absolutely right.
These are the people, and if you look at the history of science, you'll see that when the philosopher scientists dominated, all sorts of inventions and discoveries were done.
Yes.
Like the people who the Kepler and all these people with a telescope and groundbreaking, going away from the old Catholic suppression and into the Renaissance and into the Reformation and into the Enlightenment. So yeah, it's the same group. I'm convinced that you're on the track of here.
Oh, absolutely. And
why?
Why?
Yeah, why would they send Burton then down to South America?
Because he was one of them in spirit. Burton himself, from the time, you see, Burton, I go into this in the book, Burton was very likely raised by an alchemist father. And this is something that the biographers hint at, but none of them really suggest it. And I think it's obvious. His father was an alchemist. He was dragged around France and Italy, specifically to places that are associated with the history, the known history of European alchemy. Alchemists, and when he went to Oxford, he was introduced to Kabbalah. Burton was a philosopher scientist himself, who actually, amazingly, even though he was quite open about his interests, he still maintained and earned the respect of those materialist scientists of the Royal Society, because he could do just as good as they, if not better than they, at their own game. He was smart enough. Burton was smart enough to know to be a materialist with the materialists, but also in the field and at heart and within his own researches, that he knew he was a philosopher scientist. They knew he was, because they had influenced him from the time he was a young man. So he was one of them, and therefore he was the guy. That, and because of his incredible talent and skill for going undercover, for linguistics, the languages and such, he was just the perfect guy all the way around to look for what they were looking for. And they could trust him. They knew that he would keep it secret. He would keep it, between the people who sent him.
Yeah, he was an initiate, so he proved
absolutely.
But just out of curiosity, do you know if he traveled in the area around Nova Scotia ever?
Well, he came to the United States in 1860, and I have a whole chapter on that in the book, because that is a very important trip. And his arrival, they landed in Nova Scotia, in Halifax.
That's so interesting, because what I rambled about just now, what he found in Shakespeare, this guy, is that they owned a part of Nova Scotia, Francis Bacon and a few others. I won't waste time naming that. You can listen to the show, or we can talk about this off air. But there is a treasure map, and they buried from Scotland. They took the Templar artifacts that they had there and went to the New Scotland, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, that I cover that in Secret Missions 1. Yeah.
Really? Wow. Okay, but this is pinpointed. You're talking about Kabbalah? Well, a guy called Fred Nolan, who owns a part of this place, he discovered a stone cross, but then this guy who cracked the code, he discovered that it's not a stone cross, it's just a part of a tree of life. And this is, so far, is just wild theories, but what this guy did, Peter Amundsen, listen to the show with him, he went there and he found the stones that confirmed his treasure map. He found, today they found 7 of the 10 stones. Exactly where, and these stones shouldn't be there. They are artificial, they are crafted. Some of them have markings.
Oh, excellent.
And it's a huge tree of life. Like, you can only see it from, if you outline it on top. You can see on the preview of the thumbnail of the program.
That is particularly interesting, that it's a tree of life symbol. When you read Secret Missions 1 and what I say about Nova Scotia, you'll see why.
And I could add also that the treasure is buried at the mercy point of the tree of life, of all things. Not kingdom, like people would assume.
Right.
But this is just because of Shakespeare. It's all in the Shakespeare plays, and it's decoded and it's verifiable. And the most advanced code experts have confirmed this. It's like 1 to 5 billion types of coincidence numbers here. So, but I won't bore you with that now, but take a look later, because I'm suspecting now that Burton, because we know people in the same group has been there since.
Sure.
And Burton may have been one of them, actually.
I think you sent me the link to this because this is sounding more familiar. So I think I have, and it is or maybe Joseph Farrell sent it to me, but this sounds
Yeah, I sent it to Joseph, so he may have forwarded it to you.
Yeah, he forwarded it to me, and you're right. This is very interesting what he has found.
And they're digging there today,
Mhm.
and the History Channel is there, and they're milking it, and they found confirmations. They found Spanish coins from the...
In fact, yes, because I was astonished. I won't talk about it now yet with anybody. I've mentioned it to Joseph, but I saw in his research there is a theme that's in there that is connected to some things I found in my California research. That's right. I remember this now. So I don't know. Maybe I should contact him. And
Sure. He's a Mason too, by the way.
Oh, okay.
It's not completely coincidental, because he believes that the treasure map of these people, this Hermetic group, that they put the clues in Shakespeare,
Right.
And they used Bacon's own cipher system. That's what he used. And then he said that they put the ability to crack this code into Masonry.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating
Because
stuff.
this is the origins of Masonry. So you as a Mason are trained, even if you know it or not, you're trained to understand these things.
Yes.
That's his theory, that the training is in
It's embedded in the symbolism, absolutely.
the training in Masonry and the clues
Yes.
in these documents. But back to this part of the mystery.
Uh-huh.
Time is running away and we have so many things to talk about. I'm sorry, I'm an amateur host, so I'm rambling over you here.
You do great. You're fine.
Well, I'm just so enthusiastic for these things. But my next question is, when I said why did they send him? I understand why they picked him, but
Yeah.
what were they looking for?
Oh, they were looking for very specifically
Yeah.
this lost city of the manuscript 512.
Yeah, but again, why?
They were
The technology.
because it would probably have been the best example they were aware of an extant city, ruins that, would have been the best example of this lost knowledge. I mean, the language, the mysterious language that the manuscript says was carved on the archway in the entrance to the city, and on some of the walls. And there were interesting towers that looked like they had been struck by lightning, or possibly, similar to a Tesla type tower, with some type of, artificial energy device. There had been stories reported by other explorers in other locations in this general area of cities that had artificial light that would still come on at night.
The ever-burning lamp.
Even though the city had, the burning lamp that had long been abandoned. And, maybe, they thought that, get in there and take a look, and maybe we can get our hands on some of this stuff. And we don't know what kind of photographic equipment that Burton might have had with him. And we don't know. He might have gotten in there and taken photographs of this place. And people would say, well, now, and particularly in the early 21st century, but not too far, into the second half of the 20th century, satellites certainly, and today satellites would be able to pinpoint this. But here, I got in that conversation with someone recently, and I'd like to point something out. During World War II, there were big chunks of Southern California's aerospace industrial centers that, when you flew over them, looked like empty terrain, empty fields of rocky hills and trees and plants. And what they were suburban and urban industrial centers, aerospace industrial centers, that were camouflaged by vast tarpaulins that from the sky were decorated here and there, but from the sky, even from just an airplane flying over at high altitude, would have looked like just empty terrain out in the middle of the countryside.
Wow.
So if they could do that convincingly during World War II to fool a high-flying enemy aircraft, well, I argue that they could easily camouflage the site of an ancient city to satellite technology. And I think that's what they do today. I think that's why you can't go to Google Earth and find Fawcett's Lost City.
Oh yeah, Google Earth is so corrupt anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, come on. We've learned, why you're not going to see things you'd like to see, on Google Earth. But But you get the point. The point is that if Burton was sent in there to specifically bring back evidence, he might have photographed this city or brought back, artifacts.
Right.
And to answer your question, more specifically, why was he sent? I believe that's why he was sent, to find it and bring back an artifact.
I guess it's not a far-fetched idea that you probably think he did find what he was looking for. 3 years.
Oh, yes, I do. I think he did.
Yeah, could this have gone into the NIMSA group's technological breakthrough?
Absolutely. That's why the NIMSA group was there. That's why Marconi went to South America. That's why all this stuff, that I talk about in the Empire of the Wheel 2 and a little bit in Empire of the Wheel 3, and that I'll be discussing at the Secret Space Program conference. That is exactly why they were.
Now it makes sense. That's the dot that needed to be connected.
That's the picture that I'm painting. My books, Empire of the Wheel, the whole trilogy, by the way, as it turns out. I didn't know that going into it, but the whole trilogy and this Secret Missions series of books, okay? This is all part of a tapestry that I've been pulling threads, and I've been stumbling upon or trying to reveal. And Joseph Farrell will tell you what I'm actually doing is providing that 19th century background for what happened in the 20th century with the breakaway civilizations. In fact, I argue, and I stand by this, what I'm finding in my 19th century research, nothing in the breakaway civilization stuff that you're hearing people talk about and write about, none of that could have happened without what I'm finding in the 19th century, without the NIMSA organization, without the airship mystery stuff that was going on, without Burton searching and whatever it was he found in South America. All this stuff, anything you talk about post World War II and everything leading up to what the Nazis were doing, and before them in the early, all of it has its foundation and its direct link to this 19th century tapestry that I'm trying to put together and reveal here for my readers. It astonishes me, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm starting to see the arc now. So what we're dealing with here, if we are to believe people like Joseph and other researchers, then one of the losers of the ancient, how should I put it, antagonism, the battle, their ancestors, so to speak, have been looking for their forefathers' traces. And they've been doing it all the way, especially in the 19th century and even the 20th century. And then they have discovered enough stuff, and then they have used it and boosted their own.
Exactly. They were doing it in the Renaissance. They were doing it obviously during the Crusades, because that's what the Templars going to the to the Middle East was all about. They've been doing it for a long time. Again, exactly. To try and identify and reconstruct.
Back engineer the ancient civilizations.
Exactly.
And they had to do it in hiding for their powers that be, because they were...
Oh, yeah. There's been many eras where particularly because of religious superstition and because of political...
And suppression. Yeah,
political suppression and tyranny. Just bad human nature, the bad part of human nature. I'm not a humanity basher. You will not hear me say, "Oh, we're just terrible beings and we're not worthy." I reject that. Basically, we're pretty amazing. We've done some pretty amazing things. Have we done some dumb things and some bad things? Of course we have. That's human nature. But I don't bash humankind. I try to be, there's good and there's bad, and we will continue on, with the good and the bad, and it's just the way it is. But I'm not a human apologist. I these philosopher scientists looking for this stuff, I think they thought the same thing. They were,
A shadow cannot be greater than its the source of the light. So obviously, if we have a shadow, we also have a very strong light.
Absolutely. That's a great way of looking at it. I like that.
So before we wrap up for the break here, I wanna conclude a little. So we have then these people, and I must say I'm sympathetic to them, because even though there are aspects of the occult current that has been gruesome, like any ideology, any religion, any people. They've done so much good, and they had to do it in spite of threat to their lives, deep suppression. Catholicism would still be ruling us if it wasn't for these people.
Right.
They brought about the Renaissance, and that goes back to Shakespeare too, that they had these ideas, and in Fama Fraternitatis, the Rosicrucian Manifest.
Well, even worse than that, Islam would be ruling us if it hadn't been for the early Europeans who resisted them, and
Yeah, but also we have to. It belongs to the picture that the early Islam had also some hermetic. They had their light periods.
Oh, of course. There you go.
So either Islam or the Catholicism,
exactly.
The bad part of Catholicism, or the bad part
the Vatican.
And even the bad part of Judaism.
Exactly. And what is that saying? What that's saying is what I said before, is that in any group, if you get a group of human beings together, one of them's going to be a jerk, and what do? Those of us who aren't jerks, we have to hold the jerk accountable, and sometimes we got to stand up to that jerk and stop him or her. Yes. And that's just the story of humankind and human history, and we just got to keep doing it.
Bravo. I totally agree. And these people, brave people, philosophers, they brought the innovations that we are taking for granted today. But what we are interested in here is to find out their movements, their clues, their traces. And when we come back in part 2, we'll look more into the ancient civilization, the notion of what that is all about.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
So welcome back to part 2 of the program. Today we're talking with Walter Bosley again, and we are exploring the concept of ancient antediluvian civilizations. And as we learned from part 1, Bosley has connected his new lead into the version of the ancient civilization we find in South America in particular. Now, you were mentioning in the beginning, and I didn't want to go too much into it there because I wanted us to deal with your book first, but you were talking about these different civilizations that existed through time. You mentioned, of course, Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu, as some people call it, and you mentioned something even before that.
Well, a contemporary of that would be the Rama Empire.
Oh, the Rama, yeah.
And actually, there are people who say that the Rama Empire was. Some people, I think, consider the Rama Empire as part of Lemuria or Mu. But these are lost civilizations that reputedly had advanced technology, flying machines in some cases, weapons of mass destruction, so to speak.
So the Vimanas, for instance, they would belong to the Rama Lemuria civilization.
Yes, certainly. And the Atlanteans, of course, would have had flying machines also. But the Vimanas specifically.
Yeah, but in particular, the Vimanas are pointing to that civilization, aren't they?
Yeah, the Rama Empire. And that's the key to what the 19th century airship mysteries were all about. And that led... When you're talking about Vimanas, you're talking about what's been called the Mercury Vortex Engine. The Mercury Vortex Engine is what the mysterious Sonora Aero Club, which fell under the aegis of the German NIMSA, that's what they were experimenting with. And that led to the German Nazi Bell technology, which Joseph and Igor Witkowski and a few others have written about.
Yeah, it's proven that mercury is involved, and it's so interesting that quicksilver pops up everywhere.
Yeah, mercury in rotation.
Yeah.
Mercury in rotation specifically.
Yeah. And in ancient China, you have I think it was they called it, they had another name for it, but I forgot, but it had to do with traveling in space as a name for this substance, mercury, quicksilver. So and in alchemy, it's been connected. It pops up everywhere, this substance. So obviously there's something there. And if these people took the ancient stories seriously, literally, I mean, then it stands to reason that they would experiment with it in order to achieve these things.
Of course.
Yeah. And rotation is one of the oldest principle also in this spiritual matter. You see so many symbols. I mean, the Nazis didn't invent the swastika.
Right, exactly. And that's why I brought up earlier that a lot of people are under the impression that the breakaway civilization and stuff, this all started in the World War II era, specifically post-World War II. And that's simply because most of the guys who are looking at this stuff and talking about this stuff, their knowledge only goes back to essentially the Nazis in the World War II era. They really don't know very much, if anything, about the 19th century foundation of all of that. Personally, it astonishes me because it's out there. I'm not the first guy. I got to tell you, there's other researchers that I owe a huge debt to. Theo Pymans, Dennis Crenshaw, Sean Castile, Mike Mott. There's a guy that owns a gallery named Stephen Romano. I mean, these are people who, I first started learning the details about, this stuff I'm talking about, these 19th century airship mystery organizations and the NIMSA through their work. And so it's out there. And that's why I like to really clarify for the listeners and potential readers that this whole thing about, taking this old technology and developing it today secretly, this didn't start with World War II. This has been around for a couple of hundred years.
So yeah, they broke the story, but you're standing on their shoulders and filling in the blanks, we could say then.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to present, that picture, what led into that, to give a bigger picture and understanding of what's going on. And it goes back to these ancient civilizations. It reaches even farther back than the 19th century. In Empire of the Wheel 3, the Nameless Ones, I point out the NIMSA, the mysterious NIMSA connection, not only to the Germans, as it's spelled out in detail in Empire of the Wheel 2, but also how before these Germans were brought into this, the thread leading back to these lost civilizations, which connect to Atlantis and the Rama Empire and Lemuria, and even older.
Let me just interject that in Germany, and this is mainstream, you can read this in history books and everything, that when the Age of Reason really started to infest in Europe, the last stand of the alchemists were in Germany.
Yes.
All through the 19th century, they were serious scientists. Like these philosopher scientists, maybe in 1830 they lost in the Royal Society, but in Germany they lingered on, which you can see also the Germans made so many innovations in science, philosophy. They brought so many great people before everything was falling apart in Nazism. And what happened when the Nazis took over was that they destroyed everything. They murdered everyone. They burnt it. Himmler, he was frantic. He collected everything. They didn't want competition. They wanted to own this. And so if you have a lot of German alchemists, and when we say German, we should really talk not just about the nation of Germany, which is relatively young, but about the general culture of the Germanic people, which also goes a little into Czechia and other countries in the area, where you had inventors, great inventors who experimented with all kinds of technology. You have traces. So there was an alchemist, he made a submarine.
Yes.
Proven submarine I think it was in the 19th century. So you have all these things going on. So yes, why wouldn't this German NIMSA group connect the dots with Mercury, with technology, with ancient?
Well, and exactly. And I argue that there was very likely what am I trying to say? There was really predecessors in this NIMSA prior to the German Nimsa. In other words, it was not just something they stumbled upon, it was something they were introduced to. Because some of them had carried themselves far enough along to be considered like an initiate, right? They had passed through certain thresholds and certain doorways of knowledge that whoever the introducers were had realized, okay, now you know enough that you're worthy to learn the next step. And I think there was some of that involved. Right. This whole NIMSA organization has some really murky associations and goes back, way back, before the 19th century.
Yeah, so they kind of recognize people as their own if they reach a certain, if they're shown certain signs.
Yeah. In my theory, there was a split. In the 19th century, the second half of the 19th century, there was a split. I'm convinced that there are presently two breakaway organizations, and the split happened in the second half of the 19th century. And to me, the dark half, the ones who were involved with the negative aspects of the breakaway influence on our society, it comes from NIMSA. There are reasons, I go into that in my books, but there are reasons why I think the NIMSA are, for lack of a better term, the bad guys in all of this.
But then you're referring to the German faction.
The German faction was involved in the greater NIMSA, yeah, because this led to the Nazis. The Nazis are a product of the German faction of the NIMSA. That is my point in my work. The Nazis were a product of the German faction of the mysterious NIMSA. Absolutely.
Well, this is also something that our friend Farrell has touched upon in ancient times. He also talks about this split. That has been this antagonism between two factions in real ancient times.
Yes.
So you see a pattern there.
Oh, yeah.
It's like history repeating itself.
And we're caught in the middle. And you know what the pattern is? It's like I said before. You get a group of humans together, and there's going to be some jerks. And then there's going to be the ones that, are not the jerks. And they're always going to butt heads. Now, you could also have two groups of jerks, and one's just, a little bit better than the other. I mean, there's been a lot of that in history, right? Where, normal people that you would consider your basic good folks, who, for the most part, want to be left alone and don't want to terrorize each other, they get caught in the middle between factions vying for power, right? So, of course, there's some of that going on. And don't get me wrong, when I talk about two factions, which I won't veer off too much into right now, but when I talk about two factions, I'm not saying it's pure bad guys and the other guys are pure good guys. What I'm saying is the NIMSA guys are pretty dark. They are, in my view, in the bad guy camp. The other faction is probably realistically more neutral, where if they are in resistance to the NIMSA, but if that resistance helps the rest of us out, great, they're willing to do it. But if that resistance to NIMSA affects us neither bad nor good, they're doing their own thing, is my point. And so, they're just, but that's what I mean by that, just to clarify that. But the NIMSA faction is the one that has the roots reaching way, way back into this antediluvian past we're talking about.
But obviously, human beings, like we were touching upon in part one, have in themselves both what we could call bad and good.
Of course.
Which is simplistic. But you could also talk about, and this is what many people who listen to this will associate. You could talk about the energy, because a good person can be led astray, and a bad person can heal and grow.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you think one of these groups were involved with a bad kind of energy, so to speak, spiritually or otherwise, like they were, like if we're talking in a magical paradigm, we could say that they were in connection with bad forces, with bad spirits, with a dark tradition in that way? Is that what you hint at?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in the Empire of the Wheel books, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And in fact, I stated that the Nimza group that I'm talking about in the 19th century going into the 20th century, they were deeply involved in what, for lack of a better term, we would call black magic.
Right.
Absolutely. In fact, this mystery in Empire of the Wheel that I talk about that happened 100 years ago this fall, by the way, what I call the San Bernardino working. We're in the 100th anniversary of it right now. This was the darkest, blackest magic that you can imagine, and the Nimza had their hand in it and was at the heart of it.
I see. Well, then it's more easier to understand this distinction between good and bad, because human nature isn't 100%, but you could say that what we dabble with could be destructive, decaying, or creative, constructive.
Right.
So, yeah. So then I understand. But you're talking about Atlantis. I interpreted this as more of a particular place. Did you?
Well, here's what I think. The place called Atlantis, I believe, was the capital of this Atlantean civilization, the Atlantean League.
Right.
They, of course, spread out, and they had their colonies, right? But there, of course, was, I believe this, I'm convinced of this is what I embrace presently and have for a long time, is that there was indeed a place called Atlantis, and they spread their culture as wide as they could throughout the world, like the superpowers have done, our entire lives, right? And before and longer.
It is, Atlantis is, I think, a Latinization, but the letters that you can see in both Egyptian and Maya culture, according to Augustus Le Plongeon, I don't know how you pronounce the names, is ATLN.
Yes.
That's and of course in the ancient times vowels were not supposed to be written anyway.
Right.
They were magical. So when you fill it in, it becomes Atlantis. And he argues in his book that you should really check it out if you ever come across it. It's so detailed. He was a professor and he spent his lifetime on this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like I said, I'm basically familiar with Le Plongeon.
Okay. And he shows here even the swastika, everything. Egypt and Maya, he argues, is two manifestations of the same root
of course.
civilization.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we understand why the Hermetists would be interested, because even the god Hermes is a Greek version of the Egyptian god, Tooth, which they themselves looked at Egypt as their origin, philosophically, traditionally. So when they start to realize that we have traces of that in South America, it makes sense that they would send people down there.
Absolutely.
But one thing you didn't mention, but every time I raise a point, you're saying you're covering it in your book, so maybe this is covered too, and that is the fact that in South America, and especially in this part of South America we're talking about, and by the way, which have been exploited by the survival renegade Nazis, are huge caverns. It's so hollow. There's subterranean. So is this something you're touching upon? Is this related? I mean, a hidden city?
I get into the tunnels, the mysterious ancient tunnels in the Burton book. And I will probably be venturing into the subterranean world of South America and the Americas in Secret Missions 3. There is a reason for me to go there in Secret Missions 3. But it's definitely a topic that has intrigued me for many years. I've written about it in my fiction as well. So it's very, the caves, the cavern systems, very interesting stuff.
You're familiar with Sauder's work, Richard Sauder?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I have 2 of his books on my shelf right now.
Right, we're hoping to get him on. But Joseph mentioned in an interview we did with him recently that he suspects that if we have to pinpoint a place where the main secret base of the Nazis were after the war, he recognizes that in Antarctica there may have been, but he thinks that the real hotspot was in these caverns between Bolivia, Peru, Argentina. And if the Germans have roots, well, they do. They have roots to these places. It stands to reason that this is something that has been discovered, obviously, before the Nazis fled there.
Of course, yes.
And if the
And I would argue that, again, when you read what I wrote about South America and the German activity there in Empire of the Will, Two Friends from Sonora, and in my other work, I argue that the Nazis learned everything they learned about South America from the 19th century German NIMSA group.
Who?
And why.
And even why.
And why they would have learned that, because they were all over South America. They were all over these areas you're talking about, and they were searching for these places. And again, in Empire of the Wheel 2, I get into the fact that it was these 19th century Germans exploring down there, buying property, establishing locations that was how, the Nazi regime learned about all these places in the first place and had access to them. So yeah, definitely, I would agree that would be more likely where these secret bases are. I would agree with Joseph and you on that wholeheartedly.
And number 2 in that series is Friends from Sonora that we covered last time.
Yes, yeah.
But I want to get to the fact that if we look at the ancient myths, they do speak about people going underground, connections to the
absolutely.
underground.
And I didn't mean to mislead listeners. The 19th century Germans are not the only guys by any means, and these stories didn't originate with them. You're absolutely right. These stories date back to the Spanish conquest. They date back to ancient times. Absolutely.
And many also speculate that there were people from the Indians who hide when all hell broke loose.
Yes.
With the conquistadors. And El Dorado we mentioned, and that the gold was underground and all that.
Yes.
But what's your take on this? But this isn't a big part of the civilization. I mean, if Burton were there for 3 years, have you managed to track all the places he was, or is it just mysterious where he was, what he was doing?
During that period of the 6-month period, other than the first month or so of that he was known to be in Buenos Aires over in Argentina. Specifically the 4-month period, he is alleged to have simply been crossing the Andes and going up the coast of Chile to Peru. I disagree with that. I explain in the book why I disagree with it. I argue that he returned to Brazil and he was, on this classified expedition into the heart of Brazil and then went west through Bolivia into Peru. But that's my speculation, and I present my evidence why I speculate that. But it is actually virtually unknown. There is not a single word that has been written about it, and the allegation that he went to Chile, none of that can be proven. That is just as much speculation as mine is. And go ahead. I'm sorry. I ended my thought.
No.
There.
Well, yeah, okay. No, I was just thinking that 3 years, such a long time, even back then when of course, things took time.
Yeah.
But 3 years, it sounds like he must have really... I mean, if you're just roaming around frantically looking...
Well, now he went there as a British consular official. So he was performing consular duties. He had a job there for the British government, the Foreign Office. And in his spare time, he was going around exploring. But it wasn't until this last 6-month period that he disappeared into the wilderness and did not write about it. So the first 2.5 years or whatever that he was there, that's well documented. What he was doing. Yeah.
Now that makes more sense then. So he was accountable, but for 6 months he was gone.
For 6 months, really, it narrows down to a 4-month period is really mysterious. really mysterious. But yeah, other than that, is pretty much known. But it makes that 4-month period even more mysterious.
Yeah.
You consider that he was in the area where these legends of the subterranean that we're talking about, the tunnels and the lost cities that they allegedly connected to, and what was he doing? What was he seeing down there? I addressed that a little bit in the book, but I didn't go too deeply into that because there's just so much about it. David Childress actually found one of these, or he didn't find it, he didn't discover it, but he went to one of these places where these tunnels were and explored it for a day, right?
He himself went into the tunnel.
He himself in the 80s went into one of these tunnels, and he describes it, so he's able to confirm at least that segment of it. And it's very interesting. And as you said before, it does go back to this. The makers of this, the builders of this tunnel system, were very likely, these one or more of these lost civilizations, of course. And because these tunnels, the stories of these tunnels also extend over into Asia. They go. There's stories of tunnels in Tibet and Nepal, and they say that the tunnel system connects Tibet to South America.
Yeah, and we have the same here in ancient Norse. We are a mountainous region, so I think every place on Earth with old mountains have myths about these things.
Well, you have in Peer Gynt.
Yep.
You have in the Hall of the Mountain King,
Very
right?
well, yes.
That is based, as you well know, that is based on old legends too, correct?
Yes. And we have these many folk tales about trolls who lives in the mountains.
Right.
I don't know if trolls are the same understanding in America as here, but here
in the lore, yes, yeah.
Yeah, here they are like these mountain dwellers, like gnomes in a way. Right. And they used to abduct. This dovetails with UFOs and stuff too, of course. But they used to abduct, for instance, beautiful women. Force them to marry them. We have so many myths and songs and stuff about that.
What's interesting? I go into this. You mentioned the gnomes and stuff. I go into the gnome lore and the fairy lore in my Disneyland book, Latitude 33. And one of the little delicious tidbits that I put in there is, do you know why the little gnomes' hats are red? They're coned hats. Do you know why those hats are red?
This red mushroom?
No, well, that's one story. Actually, in the lore, it has been pointed out and argued that those hats start out as the color. They start out white.
Ah.
And because they drink the menstrual blood of virgins from those hats for their magical properties, that's why those hats turn red.
Wow. That's a grim aspect.
Think about that next time you see that commercial, with the little troll with the little gnome with the red hat, right?
Not the commercial I'm familiar with, but
over here in the States we have a website called Travelocity, which is a website to make all your travel arrangements, and their little mascot is one of these garden gnomes,
right.
The little statues. Yeah. And if people and I talk about that and write it in my Latitude 33 book, that why the gnome's hat is red, and it's a little gruesome, but
well, inadvertently you just perverted a whole culture, because in Norway, you don't know this probably, but the red gnome hat or cap, or what you call it in English, is a symbol of the Norwegian, because when we were occupied by the Nazis, we used different symbols to manifest that we were subversive, that we were against them.
Right.
And one of them was to wear this red. All the kids do it every in the winter time. It is a typical symbol in Norway, going far back, even before the Coca-Cola version of Santa Claus.
Right.
So so the innocent small children, they wear these red caps, these gnome caps.
You know what's interesting though too, and it's on the theme of what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The Atlantean League, and David Childress can get into this even more deeper.
Mhm.
But the Atlantean League was apparently known for the red caps that they wear.
Wow, it's that old.
Yes, and of course, and it has been said that the Phoenicians, the red cap that they would wear, the Stygian cap or whatever, comes from the red caps of the Atlantean League civilization.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so maybe that says something that they're about the Atlanteans and why their caps were red. I don't know. It's very interesting when you get deep into this lore, as you know.
Symbolism has been one of the main versions to reconstruct the lost lore. And the genius thing about symbolism is that you can cover... You know, I don't know if you have this saying, but we have a saying that says that a picture says more than 1,000 words. You probably have the same thing in English.
Now, say that again.
A picture tells more than 1,000 words.
Yes, we do, yeah.
But a symbol tells more than 1,000 pictures.
Oh, I like that.
And that's how you can comprise so much information. Like they say that in the ancient times in Egypt, when the decay were setting in, they felt that they needed to preserve the books of Tooth. The books of Hermes.
Yes.
And so they created, this is the legend then, that they created the tarot system as a way to preserve the keys to the cosmos. And if you were worthy, if you were on track, if you were not a dabbler or corrupt, but someone who was pure, who connected with the essence, you would unlock the key.
Right.
And you could then regain, everything could die out, everyone could die, but you could regain the inside of, obviously back to Atlantis, because maybe people don't know this, but the Hermetic and many of these esoteric traditions on Earth, they all claim to go back to the ancient civilizations.
Yes, yeah.
And Atlantis, the antediluvian civilizations in Atlantis. But we're talking about the location, and I'm glad you backtracked from a particular place to a civilization, because then we are in agreement. Because if you have an advanced city, you would obviously have an advanced civilization.
Sure, absolutely.
But the question about the location is interesting. It has been, of course, debated for hundreds of years. But what's your take upon the Antarctica as part of this location?
I have been intrigued with that ever since. It makes a lot of sense to me that the place Atlantis, the continent Atlantis, would be what we call Antarctica. It just makes a lot of sense to me. So I kind of embraced that when I first heard about it. I didn't hear about it till the mid to late 90s. And I really embrace that idea because it makes sense to me. I do think that if Atlantis was a place, it's under that ice in Antarctica.
That is really a frightening thought, because as we know, and we're going to have a series of interviews tomorrow, actually, I'm going to interview a scientist who's going to account for something about these polar mysteries. But we know that the polar regions are occupied today by the military-industrial complex, and it's so off limits. I could tell you things, I may do it offline, because we Norwegians, we have long ties to the poles. I have no idea why, maybe because we were seafarers and many were fishing for whales and stuff, but we have had, as you probably know, explorers who's been in both places, and it's still a thing in Norway. If you're like macho, if you're like in the proud tradition, you have to go on ski to the North Pole and to the South Pole. Cool. So we have people doing that all the time. They're even traveling there for like a manhood thing. We even have a woman, a scientist, and she was very in the news. But I know personal people who's been there, and what they have reported is just terrible. And people who has been disappeared. And there's a lot of UFO rumors, and so we're speculating maybe if there was an advanced civilization in Antarctica, the Germans could have found something, and now that the Americans are covering that area, they could have found something. And that's what I don't like. Because it means that it goes right into the hands of the breakaway civilization.
Sure.
Not much good comes from that.
And like I said, the degree of that not much good depends upon, which civilization has their hands in it. But you're right. We are certainly, the common folks who are outsiders. We may be the beneficiaries of it. We may not be. You're right there, because that place is one of the most off limits places on Earth, if not the most off limits place. It's very interesting. Now, yes, there are realistic reasons related to weather and terrain as to why access there is limited. But when you think, again, here we are in this 21st century, early years of the 21st century, and the technology, why is it still so difficult for people to go to and from Antarctica?
Yeah,
right?
That's one thing. But why can't, go to Google Earth. You see cartoon pictures of the poles. They don't cover it with real pictures. It's still censored.
Right. So what is it they are doing down there? What have they found down there? That, to me, it has everything to do with what they've found down there.
Yeah. If we get Hoagland on, when we get big enough, maybe we will get him on. And he reported a story that I explored a little, where was mentioned at least by Joseph, and that was all these scientists who got sick because we know they have found something. There were reports. I think Lake Vostok is one of the places.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they found, because the thing about Antarctica is that it's so hollow. And I'm not talking about hollow Earth right now.
Right.
Even without that, it's hollow. It's full of caverns.
Yes.
And you don't have to do much mining if you have access to them. And this is interesting because Antarctica is so close to South America,
mm-hmm.
which the Nazis exploited.
Yes.
But then it kind of also ties together with these civilizations in South America, that if they were remnants of Atlantis, survivors of Atlantis, they really didn't have a long way to go.
Right. Going to South America was the logical choice, right?
Yeah.
And then, and if they didn't hop across, to what we call Tierra del Fuego, there was New Zealand and Australia not too far off, and the South Pacific Islands, and of course those cultures are tied in with the mysteries of ancient South America. So, absolutely, it makes sense that the reason they're tied in with these mysteries is because they are the survivors of Atlantis.
But you're saying that mainstream regards South America as just a few thousand years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you think it's older?
Well, because of what we talked about earlier about all these sites around the world, not just in South America, where the farther you go back, the more advanced the architectural technology is. And some of those places, of course, they've been able to date farther back than just 1,000 years. And you have the similar, if not same, kind of technology in South America. And it's the peripheral. There's peripheral evidence that points to an older period. And then, the tradition and the lore. Yeah. And then when you look at what is known about the technology of the civilizations that mainstream science and academia wants to credit these structures with, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then let's not forget what I said earlier and what other sources have pointed out for hundreds of years, when the Spaniards of the conquistadors of Pizarro's era asked the Inca and asked the local natives who built this stuff, they said, we don't know. It's been around for thousands of years, very long time, or the old ones. And, that gets dismissed as just a bunch of, they were trying to impress the conquerors. Here's the thing. Whenever academia can't explain something, they call it religion and superstition.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
So.
And culture.
Yeah.
So, they dismiss it by that. But if there was, I mean, if you look at the traces, we can see not only in the lore that there are reports of advanced technology, but we can see it in the very remnants of the sites themselves.
Yes.
When we had Cream on, he explained that, and this is mainstream science, it just takes 10 to 20,000 years for everything to be wiped out. Absolutely everything, even plastic. And so anything that is older would not have remnants except stone.
Right.
And we have stone, we have advanced treated stones in South America, don't we?
Yes. Yeah. Here's the thing: the way the stones were shaped, the way they were fit together, the fact that that they last through earthquake and other natural disaster, when the lesser construction of the eras that we know of, that we can identify, just crumble under those same circumstances. That right there is strong evidence. And when you look at the precision of this construction and the fitting together of it, the precision of the cutting of these stones, you look at the mainstream explanations and you just scratch your head or you laugh.
In many cases, they can't even explain it. Take, for instance, the size and the fact that some of these stones have been carried over huge distances.
Yes, that too. Yes, exactly.
And you're probably familiar with the lore that is also in many places in India, in Egypt, in South America, and this has had a little revival of Coral Castle, but it's the explanation that they used sound technology to carry these.
Right. Anti-gravity activated through manipulation by sound or vibration.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm very familiar with that, because that is something that, as I mentioned before, there's always a bit of your research that you don't talk about publicly.
the lost word.
That is something that that's in there.
But sound vibration is just a frequency of all. I mean, everything is vibration. So sound vibration is something that in Tibetan places they have a very healing exploitation of this science, but
sure.
Obviously in the military they use it for destructive purposes.
It could. Yeah.
So everything, it goes back to what you said, things can be used good and bad. But when you mention two civilizations, you kind of think that there are two breakaway civilizations today?
Yes, I think there definitely are two breakaway groups that are taking advantage of basically the same knowledge.
Right. Are these the heritage of the Sonora and the Nimsa group, to put it like that?
In my books, Empire of the Will 2, Friends from Sonora, and in Empire of the Will 3, The Nameless Ones, I do personally, just to keep it simple, I identify these factions as Team Nimsa and Team Sonora. Now, I'm pretty sure that Nimsa, well, we know, according to the source, Charles Delschau, that Nimsa, and then my German translation, that Nimsa was actually an identifier, a name that was used. They probably, used some other version of it in the last 120 years. But the other one, of course, would not call itself Team Sonora. That's just my personal identifier.
Sure.
What I think is that the faction that broke off, here's how it worked. You had a bunch of these mysterious little clubs, secret little clubs, that were messing around with flying machines dating back as early as the 1850s. Now, there were several of them in the United States, and according to Delschau, the German immigrant Delschau, who wrote about this stuff, that they were all, up until the point, they were all under the aegis of this secretive Nimsa organization. Now, I argue, and I present the evidence in my books, I argue that sometime after the U.S. Civil War, that a faction led by American industrialists broke away from the Nimsa control and started pursuing this stuff on its own. And they did this, they initially had U.S. War Department personnel and resources involved, but I think by the 1870s or 1880s, definitely by the 1890s, they had begun to disengage from any U.S. government involvement. And by the time you got into the early 20th century, they had basically said, thank you, but no thanks, we're our own thing. So that by the time you get into the 20th century, you have these two factions. And this faction, this American that started out as, American industrialists. I would say it includes more international elements now. But their focus was more on a practical nuts and bolts. How do we exploit this technology? How do we go about our own business and maybe even, as the years went on, profit and exploit the resources off planet eventually, you could say. They were more the material. Let's see how we can just use this to go exploring. Whereas the NIMSA, as I point out, and I provide the details why and the wheretofores and all this, the NIMSA, they were the ones, as I said earlier, were much more involved in the magic and the mystical and the esoteric aspects of this, and they're more interested in their power on Earth in controlling humanity. Whereas I think the other guys, their goal, I think, was to heck with this place. Let's be able to get off here and come and go and, find. Whereas the NIMSA was more, let me put it to you this way. If there's anybody who represents the sinister New World Order who wants to control humanity, it's going to be the NIMSA faction. And I explain why that is in the book, because involved under the NIMSA aegis were spiritualists and theologists, and it's out of that milieu, believe it or not, some people don't understand this, out of that milieu is where the eugenicists really gained popularity. And what did the eugenicists lead to? That led to, who embraced eugenicism, and
fascism.
And exactly, the Nazis. And by the way, eugenicists, that all started here in the United States.
I didn't know.
With some of our creepy thinkers. And it was very popular in theology and spiritualist circles. And spiritualism with the capital S, which became later in the 20th century what we call over here the New Age movement. Okay? And theosophy, these were all the tendrils of the NIMSA and the black magic guys, the black magicians, were in spiritualism and theosophy. And so that kind of, and I go into that in my books.
But I want to say, to defend theosophy a little, that it was such a huge movement that they had all kinds. They had also, they had Nazis, people who became Nazi occultists. But
they had people that were anti-Nazi.
Yeah. And Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, they were even attacked by the Nazis. But it's interesting because even the theosophists had this focus on they were synchronistic. They tried to merge all traditions. But at least they had some kind of traditional, they wrote a lot about Atlantis, Lemuria. But when you look at the spiritualism, you get a lot of weird things.
Oh, they were definitely, I will say this, the spiritualists were a much worse, darker group than the theosophists.
Yeah, because they took away their control over their self and let any energy come through them.
God. Yeah.
Are you aware of the researcher, author Tim Schwartz?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I had him on recently. And
he's interviewed me before, I believe.
He's interviewed you, right, because he knew about your work. You've been mentioned in several of our programs by people, Farrell and him. But he also mentioned that there were these spiritualists who channeled some information that Tesla and others. I remember you mentioned the 1908 Tesla spaceship. That was accounted for in detail by him. He's written books about this.
Yes, he has. And Sean Castile also has ventured that direction. And I'll be talking about that in my talk at the Secret Space Program Conference in Texas, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention it now, so we can talk about that now.
Sure.
Actually, I have one more question about the ancient before we go to the Breakaway conference. This word NIMSA, like I said to you off air, if you remove the M, you got an anagram of Nazi, because Y and I was the same letter, because it's a vowel, it's a magical letter. It's written in ancient alphabets as the same letter. So you actually have the words Nimsa, to take away the M, and you have the words Nazi. Maybe a coincidence, but it's interesting. But what I want to get at is this other meaning of it, namely the nameless. That indicates ancient Egypt.
Yes. Ancient Egyptian lore and symbology and stuff absolutely is involved in the definitely in the origin and the analysis of the name Nimza. Absolutely.
Okay. So, but you don't want to say anything more about that? I mean, there was in ancient Egyptian lore, they had this notion about the nameless ones among the gods. But
I again in Empire of the World 3, the Nameless Ones, I go into that very specifically. In fact, I present a thorough analysis done by the author Sesh Hari, who's the author of a book titled The Handprint of Atlas, and he pointed out the Oannes connection, how the Nameless Ones are connected to this mysterious dark elder god of the sea. Right. As a matter of fact, in the Nameless Ones, I point out that this is the tradition where Lovecraft drew his image of Cthulhu.
Right.
And also what Aleister Crowley had written about an event in 1907. Peter Levenda talks about this in his book. Oh my gosh, it's the one about the. I apologize, I'm doing a brain dump on the title, but it's the Dark Lord. Peter Levenda's book, The Dark Lord, goes into this very, very deeply. Right. And it is connected. In fact, I refer to it in my Nameless Ones book. It is connected to the Egyptian idea of without a name, the nameless ones, literal interpretation.
Yeah. So you think that the Typhonian tradition, as it's called in modern version.
That's it. Yeah. The Typhonian.
You think that's connected to the energy that the nymphs are represented?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, it's really some heavy, dark stuff.
Very dark stuff, so-called chaos magic and stuff.
And that's the source of the mysterious Nimza group. And then they come along and they get their hooks into these 19th century German nationalists. That are Prussian, identified as Prussian, of course, right? Yeah. And they have this vision of a nationalist German state, right? And they're also very much interested in things mystical and such. So that Nimza, the Nameless Ones, they get these German, these Prussians who are German nationalists to found their organization, which is also pronounced Nimza, but which I have translated as the Nationalistische Jagdflugzeug Maschinen Zalingsamt. And it would be NJMZ lowercase a. And what does that tell us? Remember before earlier we talked about the duality of hieroglyphs. Now here we are talking about the ancient Egyptian words or phrase Nimza, which is spelled exactly Nymza, which is how Delshel spelled Nimza. And remember I said there's a duality there. Well, there they created a duality in German language where even though the German organization, I argue, would have actually been, the acronym would have been spelled NJMZ lowercase a, the way it's pronounced, still, like an Egyptian hieroglyph, is still saying Nimza, correct? And this is where the whole thing, that's the clue that how complex this is, what they do with these Germans.
Yeah. Well, speaking of playing with words, which, by the way, many magicians, including Crowley, they always emphasized etymology, because there were hidden meaning. The soul of the world, so to speak, is hidden in etymology. And I see that you in your Richard Burton book are playing, or we were mentioning chaos magic, and Enochian magic is a part of this, and then that goes back to Enoch of the Abrahamic traditions. But I see you have an interesting play on the word, on the name of, I don't know, I never know how to pronounce this in English, but Tenochtitlan. I don't know how you say it in English.
Yeah, well, I pronounce it, and we usually pronounce it here, Tenochtitlan, which was Tenochtitlan. That of course is.
But it hides Enoch's name in it.
Exactly.
That's so fascinating.
And then, now get this. Then in South America, there's what? There's Teotihuacan, or I'm sorry, in Mexico, there's Tenochtitlan was what is Mexico City today.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Then there's Teotihuacan, which is outside of Mexico City. That's where the giant pyramid of the sun and that complex of the pyramid of the moon, and that embeds Tehoti's name, or as you call Tooth, or Hermes, Teotihuacan. Right?
Yeah.
And I always thought that was really interesting. And then Tenochtitlan has Enoch right in there, right? And so, and then when you go to South America, you've got Tiwanaku. David Childress presents in his book, The Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia. He gets into, I believe it is, a gentleman's theory, researcher's theory about Tiwanaku itself is a breakdown similar to what we're doing here with Enoch's name and Teotihuacan's name, or Hermes' other, Egyptian name. So, yeah, absolutely. I think there's something to that. I haven't fleshed it out entirely. It's just, hey, look at this. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah. Damn, we need to have Childress on, that's for sure.
You absolutely do, yeah.
You said T-O-T.
Yeah. Tehoti is the correct pronunciation of the T-H-O-T-H,
right,
according to most scholars.
Yeah, I see you have many interesting sources in your book. Many of these of the sources you're using who lives are people who we have on a wish list to interview. And I always, it's a habit, an old habit of mine, but if I'm confronted with a new book, before I read it, I often check the sources just to see that, because you can tell a lot about the book if you see the sources.
Oh, absolutely.
If you recognize the sources, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. Yeah, he knew how to find the right sources, right? So that's impressive that you're pointing to many interesting researchers, notwithstanding Childress, but also people like Lomas and West and many others. So yeah, kudos for that.
Oh, thank you.
You're well read. Yeah, and finally they have recognized you in this area of literature to invite you on the Breakaway Civilization Secret Space Program Conference.
Yeah.
Let's begin with the boring facts. When is it?
It is the weekend of October 31st and November 1st, Halloween weekend.
Of course.
Here. And here's what's interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't think they knew this when they did this, but it's in, of all places, a city called Bastrop, Texas. Now, Bastrop is south of Austin, Texas, which is in kind of central Texas. And why is Bastrop interesting? Because those who have read about the airship mystery of the 1890s will recognize Bastrop as a place that many of these airship sightings were reported. In the newspapers. And so I thought, well, that's very fortuitous, because the airship mystery, I connect it to the Breakaway Civilization mystery. And there we are in all places, right there in the heart of airship mystery country. But again, like I said, October 31st, November 1st in Bastrop, Texas. And it looks like it's going to be a really interesting conference. Joseph Farrell is speaking, Catherine Austin Fitz, myself.
A good lineup.
Yeah, I think so. And there's others that they're bringing in.
Paula Violette.
Yes, Paul Violette. Absolutely. And I'm very excited and honored to be part of it. I'm really looking forward to presenting my stuff to this audience to, see what they think about it. And it's always good, of course, to go to these things and get to hang out with the other speakers and researchers because you learn so much.
Yeah. You said the name of the city was something?
Bastrop.
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 So that hides the word Bast, which is the ancient Egyptian deity for warfare.
Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, my gosh.
Warfare.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. We got to figure out what the ROP would stand for, right?
I have many ideas for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, warfare is in a way what we're talking about here, because
Sure.
the breakaway civilization are not sitting idly by and...
No. They can defend themselves, like we know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your take on it will be the airship mystery and the NIMSA approach then?
I'll be presenting what I call the 19th century foundation for the breakaway civilization theory. Yeah.
Excellent. Because our series here, we have different series that we're doing. Actually, this was supposed to be part of the antediluvian series, but we're kind of tying it also into the breakaway series. But we have created a timeline. And your program is actually the first program in that timeline.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool,
because
okay.
but it's a logic development here, right? So
okay.
I'm so glad that they recognize this also, because the people from Holland, which is behind this, isn't it?
Yes.
Europeans, yeah. So, but by recognizing your role in this, they also recognize, it's a recognition of your work, that people are starting to understand now. They're going away from this old 70s paradigm about, aliens came here in right after the war. But now they're starting to get the big picture. That's what's so good about it.
Because there was information, I think, that for the longest time just wasn't out there. And like I said, those researchers I mentioned before, Theo Pymans, Dennis Crenshaw, Sean Castile, Michael Busby. Michael Busby's done an excellent book called Solving the 1897 Airship Mystery. His work is essential in all this. Stephen Romano, all these guys who came before.
Are any of them alive today?
Oh yeah, these are all contemporary guys. Yeah, all of them that I named, absolutely. And you should, I can, afterwards I can send you, how to find them, because I think you would probably like to speak with any of them.
But if it was out there in a way, it wasn't tied up. The big thing now is that dots are connected, and kudos to especially Joseph and Richard Dolan and for just first this concept of the breakaway civilization, and now this culture, this movement we're all part of creating, where we're connecting these dots.
And we're learning the truth about our own history, and we're learning that it's maybe. In a way, the whole ET thing has become kind of a fallback, almost like a religion, where, it's just easy to say it came from other beings and leave it at that, when actually, no, or as I said earlier, and I'm not the first and only one to say it, we are probably ET ourselves, and I just think it makes it all the more interesting.
And
I'm much more fascinated with with the lost, forgotten human civilization than I am with ET.
Yeah, me too. That's part of the reason we have this ancient series. But it's so good too that we're breaking through the taboos, maybe, because for the longest time it seems that the ET perspective has been blessed from above. Like, okay, people, look over there.
Exactly, sleight of hand.
Or look to the swamp gas, and if you don't buy that, if you don't buy the space monsters, go to the balloons, the weather balloons, and the swamp gas.
That's right.
And then we can hide our own hand in this.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, how did they, was it Joseph that pitched you? How did they become aware of your part in this? Do you know?
Who?
Not the NIMSA, not the breakaway civilization, but people
the secret
who...
space program conference guy?
Yes.
Oh, well, I attended last year's conference in San Mateo as a consultant for Joseph. And so I met Yaron and the people running it. And, in just talking with them, they learned that I had been writing about the things I write about. And I think Joseph Farrell recommended that they look closer at my stuff. So, Yaron asked for a couple of the books. And so I sent him the ones that are pertinent to it. And, he took a closer look at my stuff and said, hey, you know, I think this is a good fit. It's an obvious fit that our audience, you know, needs to learn more about. And so that's, you know, because I had written Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, the year before. It had been published the year before. So I had already been into this 19th century airship mystery thing for quite a while. And so I was knowledgeable of it, and I had already formulated my point of view that it's definitely part of the heritage of the breakaway civilizations that emerged in the 20th century. So, you know, I think I convinced them, and here I am.
Excellent. Well, I won't be going. It's too far away, but we're really encouraging most of our listeners.
Eventually, I think it'll appear online, so you'll be able to take a look at the presentations.
Yeah, like the two previous. I think this is the third one, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And they have such an excellent quality lineup of guests, and also I really like that they approached so-called dark journalist to host it this time. I don't know if you know about him, but we're going to interview him.
No.
Yeah, Daniel List is his name. Yeah, he's going to be the host for the conference. And
right. Yeah, I knew that. I'm just not familiar with his work, and I need to catch up.
Well, he's doing very good work. He invites the right people. He's doing this kind of internet TV, and we are doing internet radio, and but we have like the same kind of tastes in guests, I think, because when I see the program, good programs he's done, they're professional, those guys, and they know how they have the same people on. They have Catherine Fitz, they have Joseph, they have Lavenda, they have all these people, Dolan. He haven't had you on yet, but I can predict that you will probably come on after the conference.
I'd be glad to, you know. We'll see. I appreciate any opportunity I get to share my ideas and work with, you know, anyone who wants to listen.
Yeah, and it's going to become a big crowd. I mean, it's becoming a new cult movement, I think, within the alternative research. I think the Breakaway faction is getting their own coherent kind of part in this counterculture, because it's new, it's fresh, it makes sense, and it belongs to the 21st century informed.
I think it's also answering questions that the ET hypothesis fails to answer.
Exactly.
And
it's a natural evolution of that, of the older one.
You know, but what's interesting is, and it's very frustrating, I think, is that Joseph Farrell, in his book Roswell and the Reich, has written, in my opinion, the most thoroughly presented theory on what happened at Roswell and what Roswell was about than any other, and he gets routinely ignored. That book gets routinely ignored or practically assaulted by ET hypothesis devotees. They hate that book because it's very inconvenient. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to look at it. And here's the interesting thing. Most of the critics of it have never read it. They admit that they've never read it. They just don't want to hear anything but E.T. And you know, I got to tell you, to be honest, the E.T. hypothesis, you know, reached a dead end and has been rotting and stale for a long time. And it's time to consider it.
Yeah, but this is the old god, and they are dying off anyway. So
that's right. It's a religion that's just really got kicked off relatively recently in history as such, and it's already being, you know, killed.
Or transformed.
And they don't like that.
Yeah, and here we are, and we're taking it to the next level.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that you get your due now, that you're recognized and as a part of this.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll admit that, you know, because of shows like yours and that my readership is growing, you know, there's more people interested in what I'm doing. And, you know, I like to emphasize that I do not, when I write these books, as I said, I have to personally justify whether a book should be written. You know, I'm not just writing the books to have a product out there. So you'll find with my books that the research I presented is to make what I think is a strong argument for something that I've stumbled upon, something that I found, for a thread that I pulled. If I don't feel like there's enough there to justify the book, I won't write the book just to have a book. And that's why I refer to Secret Missions 3 still as tentative. I'm about 85% there that it is going to happen, but I'm not 100% there that I'm still digging, I'm still researching, and I feel like I am probably going to find the nugget of gold I need to say, aha, this book needs to be written. But I don't like to say it's going to happen until I'm at that point.
I see.
So I try to give sincere work. I try to make it the real deal, so to speak.
But this is also a trait with this new take on the alternative research that people are now fed up, I think, about all these so-called insiders, all these claims, all these. It's so much misinfo and disinfo and all that bunk. Now there's a standard. Finally, it's a standard about the research quality, about not having an agenda. You can have a truth agenda. But like you say, you need to be on trace of something tangible. That's the researcher. That's the investigator.
I'll be honest with you. When I run out of legitimate things that I think are sincerely legitimate to write about, I'll stop doing it. I'm not going to just. There's not going to be Empire of the Wheel 12. There's not going to be Secret Missions 19.
But that means you'll never stop because there's so much to grab of mysteries out there.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure you'll have your hands full nonetheless.
There will be something, because I will say this, each time, it was doing Latitude 33, the Disneyland book,
that started it.
That led me to the Cora Stanton mystery, which then became the Empire of the Wheel trilogy. And it was the Empire of the Wheel trilogy that led to the thread I pulled where the Juan Cabrillo information emerged and became Secret Missions, and pulling threads connected with that led to the Burton thing.
Right.
So
you don't like loose ends. So you find new thing and you track it down.
It's impossible to track down all the loose things because, gosh, there's so much. What I try to do is I pull a thread that I find interesting and I try to present it as thoroughly as I can. And I leave another thing I don't do is I don't debate. I don't argue with people. I don't bicker. My thing is read it or don't, believe it or don't. My big thing is to the readers, you decide for yourself.
Right.
I'm not trying to convince you. I'm not trying to change your mind if you're adamantly opposed to what I'm saying. I'm just presenting to you what I have found. Isn't this interesting? Here's some facts. Here's some historical details. Here's my speculations. But, it's up to you to decide. And we've gone for many years where there's a lot of people out there that expect to be told what to believe, right? And this is what they've come to want. And when you don't do that, I initially got all sorts of resistance from some readers because I wasn't telling them what to think. Well, I've had a few books out now and people understand what it is I'm trying to do. And I refuse to tell people what to think. I say, here you go. Here's what I think. Here's what I think is possible, but this over here is speculation. What do you think? It's up to you. You decide for yourself. And that's what I try to do. I'm just trying to shed light on some mysteries that I think, another thing is I won't cover something that I feel has been covered already.
Yeah, good point.
Or I won't cover it in a way that it's been covered already, if that makes sense.
Oh, very much. This is a part of the standard we come to expect now from these new generations of researchers that you now belong to. But this reminds me of another thing. Do you get a lot of flack? Because in the alternative community, I hate that word, but I have no better.
Yeah.
There are all sorts, and there are these who, yes, there are conspiracies out there, but some people make conspiracies into orgy, a religion, And what about? Don't you get a lot of bias because of both your Masonic connection, but also your previous work as in FBI and stuff?
Yeah.
What would you say to people who judge you for these things?
Oh, they're being ignorant.
Obviously, but
I was interested in this stuff long before I ever went to work for the U.S. government. I was having experiences long before I ever went to work for the U.S. government. I think how I've presented my material since I left working for the U.S. government should speak to that a lot, to the contrary of what some people think. I initially was taking flack from the skeptic community. Here in the States, the skeptic community, quite frankly, a lot of them I can't think of a good word to say about them because they're just all about bickering. They're just all about being contrary. They're not really about maybe saying, well, convince me. They're just about they intend to be contrary from the get-go, and that's what they're about.
Yeah, it's a faith-based ideology.
They're as bad as some of the true believers that they like to attack. So, I've had the skeptic guys. Some of those guys don't like me. And then there's your true believers who, some of them don't like what I do because...
You're an Illuminati agent, aren't you?
Well, yeah, they don't like my conclusions. The same reason that Joseph Farrell's Roswell and the Reich book is hated.
Oh yeah, those guys, right? I agree.
Yeah, some of my books, some of my conclusions are not appreciated. But you know what I've learned? I've learned to talk to and just focus on the people that are curious and are open to hearing my ideas and are open to reading the books and to have a discussion. The kind of people that they go into it knowing, yes, Bosley speculates, but I'm willing to discuss his speculations. I don't spend 5 minutes, and you'll notice on interviews, I'll tell hosts that, if they want me to come on and debate and argue with some skeptic guy, I won't do it because that's a waste of time.
Sure.
That just to me that's a waste of my time.
But you do want to have like intellectual conversations about the topic, of course.
I want to have conversations about the topic and discussions about the topic, but I will not debate. I will not get into a convince me type of discussion because that really honestly that goes nowhere.
Our time is too valuable for that, isn't it?
And I don't expect everybody to agree with me. But there is a difference between debating and bickering over something and having a discussion with somebody that may not agree with everything you say, but they're interested in hearing what you have to say. So I'm just saying I don't debate.
No, so you want the work to speak for itself, right?
I hope it does. I mean, there's always going to be somebody that's going to tear your work apart. That's the other reality of this.
Well, I see more tendencies to try to tear the person apart instead of the work.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that's how they do it.
It was better if they tried to tear the work apart.
Well, here's what they do. If your work is more solid than they can tear apart, then they'll attack you. That's how it works. Or they'll try both. But, what's interesting is in the last few years, not too many have attacked me because I think what I'm doing, there's not a whole lot of people out there doing exactly what I do.
Good point.
So I kind of stayed off of some radars, you might say. And because I think I do pretty good scholarship as these things go in the so-called alternative community, as you say, As these things go, I think I do pretty good investigations and pretty decent scholarship, and I'm upfront that what I do, I'm upfront when I'm speculating, 100%. I admit, tell people, hey, and particularly in the Burton book, I think in the first paragraph of chapter 7, I flat out say, hey, everything from this point is speculation. It is based on facts and details, but it is speculation.
But you share the facts and details too, so
yes,
we can
absolutely.
We are free to take other approaches to the speculation.
Yes, of course.
It makes sense in our own.
Of course.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, Walter. I think we've covered most of it then for this time.
It's been awesome. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, we have interesting debates. I always feel that time is running away from us. I feel we just started to scratch, and now it's been 1.5 hours for part 2 already.
Time is always running away from us, Al.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
I will see you in time.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There you go.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for dropping by and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And I guess I'll see you back when you launch your next series of books.
Well, like I said, if all goes the way it looks like it's going, I might very well likely have Secret Missions 3 out by Christmas time.
Cool.
And of course, I'll release the subtitle is kind of a giveaway, like the Burton book was. And you know me, I don't like to give away until it's available.
Right. So I won't ask.
So I'll announce the whole thing when it's ready to be released. But I'm shooting for Christmas if things continue going as well as they're going in the research.
Perfect. Well, good luck with that.
Thanks.
It's been so interesting, as always, and we've been all over the place today. A little chaotic, but I think people have enjoyed it, especially if they have followed our last interview with you. It will make more sense.
Great.
And really good luck with the conference, too.
Oh, thank you. I'm also speaking at something called the Alchemy 5D event in Los Angeles the week of September 23rd through 27th. That weekend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I'm speaking on Latitude 33 and issues associated with the Disneyland book and research at that one. So 2 conferences.
Yeah, it was called Alchemy.
It's the Alchemy event 5D event.
Okay.
And it's
5D.
in LA at LAX. Oh, one of the hotels. I'm doing a brain dump. It's I think the Holiday Inn.
Yeah, we'll put a link to it, I think.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. And
cool.
You know, but I'm especially looking forward to the one in Texas, the Secret Space Program Breakaway.
Okay. Well, good luck with that too.
Thank you.
Remember, folks, we have a presentation of all our guests at our website, where you can find the links to all of Bosley's sites and a survey of his books. Before we leave, let me share a few fun facts about you, the listeners. A diverse group indeed, where some trends are fascinating. For instance, we only have 15% female listeners, which is as expected considering the somewhat malish topics we've covered so far. In time, there will be more stuff that appeals to a broader perspective of females also, but for now, 85% of you are indeed males. 50,000 of you, that's half the audience, are Americans. 12% are British, 8% are Canadians, and 7% are Scandinavians, with the huge majority being Norwegians. Then follows Australia, Germany, Netherlands, New Zealand, Ireland, Finland, France, and the rest of the world. Now, it's interesting to see who listens to most parts of the programs. The top of average listening duration is Slovenia, of all places. Apparently, you guys are bright enough to keep your attention span focused. Then follows Taiwan at second, kudos, and USA at third. So the bashing of Americans' intellect seems to be undeserved. Or perhaps we're just attracting an above-average segment of American listeners. The youngest audience are Norwegians, with 40% of them being below 30. The oldest are Canadians, with 40% being above 55 years of age in average. Finally, it seems we have quite a hardcore listening base in Argentina and Chile, with a decent amount in Patagonia. So, a little shout out to you guys. We're on to you, so just keep listening. If you enjoy our programs, why don't you become a sponsor? You decide the amount you want to donate. Anything from $1 and above gets you access to the sponsor page, where you enjoy some benefits which you can read about at our website. By the way, a wise man once said, "Rest satisfied with doing well and leave others to talk of you as they please." That's it for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Your host has been your pal Al, backed by the entire Borealis team. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?